So you know who we are, and you've had a chance to meet Sidonia, who's our new committee assistant. But I'm not sure if we've met anybody else. Well, some we have. And you want to do a quick introduction of who you brought with you, Carrie?
Yeah, I think that's great. So you all know me. I'm Carrie Saylor, the Manager of Government and Public Affairs at the Vermont Food Bank, and I live in Lyndonville. And this is my colleague, Sarah Hedlund. She is the Director of Communications and Marketing. Did I get that right? Yes. Also with the Vermont Food Bank, and she lives in Huntington. So we're covering geographic territory here. Today I brought my daughter Moxie with me because she's off school and needed an adventure. We work with Amy Schellenberger Action Circle. They're our lobbyists. So you can always talk to them about us too.
To see you all. And just because we don't have a whole lot of time, maybe we'll skip our going around introducing ourselves and make sure that we do have time to hear what you've got to share with us today. And tell us what that is.
Great. Sidonia, are you ready to? You've gone live. Okay, great. I have to reintroduce myself for the record, right? Or were we already on the record?
Go ahead, let me do it.
Carrie Saylor. I live in Lyndonville and I work for the Vermont Food Bank. We're here to give you a brief update about essentially our work at the Vermont Food Bank and a shortened version of our annual hunger briefing that we do each year. And I don't know if some of you saw that. We did it in September. So this will be a review for those of you that may have seen the recording of that briefing. I have updated a few numbers based on what we saw this fall. And I'm going to run through a slideshow with that, and Sarah will just sort of interject some information that we have from our network partners or community members or anecdotes that sort of help illustrate what's going on. And Mr. Chair, I'm happy to be interrupted if there are questions or to save questions for the end, whatever you feel like is the best strategy.
Yeah, I think if anybody has a question as we're going, sometimes it's better to ask a question than if that's okay with you. So we'll.
Okay, and if it lags a little bit, I'll be like, hang on, let me blow through the next 3 slides. I'm going to share and hope this works.
And I think that your presentation will be, maybe is already on our committee page, but it may be hard to pull it up right now just because of some technical issues.
Okay, great. We covered that one already. The brief overview of the Vermont Food Bank is that we are the only food bank in Vermont. There's often some confusion about local organizations who distribute food directly to community members. We refer to those folks as our network partners or our community partners. We often have a relationship, although we do not exclusively have relationships with those organizations. They are sometimes independent organizations who do food distribution and food drives in their community. We operate 3 large food distribution facilities, one in Barrie, one in Brattleboro, and one in Rutland. And those serve all 14 counties with either deliveries or pickups of food that we receive through donations and that we purchase. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about food acquisition and distribution later, but that's sort of the broad overview. We also do a few other functions in the state. I'm not going to name all of them, but ones that you all should be aware of. We do SNAP application assistance. So we are one of the statewide organizations. There are a lot of local level organizations, but we're the statewide organization who is assisting people who are signing up for 3 Squares Vermont benefits, which is referred to as SNAP federally. And we have a texting line, we have a phone hotline, we have emails. People can make appointments with our colleagues who do that work to get help walking through that complex application or addressing challenges with their application where they perhaps were denied and they don't understand why, or they need to provide more information and don't know how to get it. There's all sorts of work that those folks do. And the other one this I think committee will be particularly interested in is that we also have the SNAP Ed contract for the state of Vermont. So that is a special contract that the USDA has with organizations to do fresh food recipes and cooking training. So we have a staff of people who are around the state who will pop up at different places and teach people how to cook delicata squash if they've never seen it before, and do taste tests. And we have an online recipe catalog. So it's really a great way to use primarily vegetables. Most of those recipes, as dictated by the USDA, have to be primarily focused around how to use produce. So I know you all are vegetable people. This is just a sort of brief version of our map. We work with more than 320 food shelves, food pantries, meal sites, hospitals, schools, several community centers. We work with several of the federally qualified health centers to provide food in those communities. And where you see these yellow dots, that's a high concentration of locations where there were just too many to pop up blue dots. So some communities have a lot, but if you look way up at the top of the screen, you'll see Brighton, and then further up, there's a little one in Canaan. So some areas, there just are not as many of those partners. And those partnerships are dictated by interested organizations and an application process. So if you're looking at your community and saying, I don't see a blue dot on my community, we can have a side conversation about that. But by and large, a lot of our network partners serve multiple towns. So it isn't about the town they're located in, it's about the area. This is a little more detail about where the food we provide to communities comes from. So we operate 2 federal programs that are dictated by the Farm Bill. One is the Commodity Supplemental Food Program for seniors over 60 who qualify at a level of 130% the federal poverty level. So it's a pretty challenging program to qualify for. There's a low, you have low income to qualify for that program, and it provides boxed food monthly, and that boxed food comes from the USDA. The Emergency Food Assistance Program, we call it TFAP, is federal commodity food, and we receive that on an irregular schedule, we'll say, from the USDA, and some of it is pretty standard staple food. We'll get canned and shelf stable food, and then there are occasionally all sorts of things that we receive that are overages from farms around the country. Oranges was one recently. We got half a truckload of oranges and had to distribute them all within a week. So it really can vary broadly and is not always, that sort of part is a little more random, whatever. There was one year we had extra cranberries for months. We get donated food. So we receive donated food from local farms through gleaning programs that we operate at the food bank. And also there are local gleaning programs around the state that operate independently of us that help provide food to those network partners that we're also providing food to. And then we receive lots of donated food from corporations and from individual donations from food drives in communities or larger food drives. And then in addition to that, we purchase food. So we purchase food through the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program, which is about $2 million of food a year produced from Vermont farms. It's first quality farm food. Feeding America is our national network, and through them we have access to larger corporations where we can purchase larger quantities from, think General Mills or something along those lines, where we can get larger bulk purchasing discounts because of that national relationship. And then we have local food vendors that a lot of grocery stores also use here. So we purchase food in a similar way to grocery chains by the pallet or half truckload. And that food goes out in a variety of ways. So
Representative O'Brien's got a hand up.
see that, sorry.
I just wondered, I remember, I think maybe it was John Sales last year telling us about there's a sort of bread basket south of Montreal in Quebec that you purchase a lot of food from. So would that be just under food vendors that you would buy that? Like, where does that sort of fall?
Technically, we consider that donated because it's actually a donation from Western Harvest, which is the operation in Quebec. They donate it to Feeding America. We do have to pay a fee, a packaging and shipping fee, to have that delivered to us. So, it's not a free donation, but it is at a huge discount compared to the amount of food that we acquire through that source. And really, that's a great question and sort of a great way to underscore, the system that we operate in is very much the end of the line. A lot of that Western Harvest food, those are seconds, or it's overages that they were not able to sell. So we're not getting the same thing from them that we're getting from Vermont farms. that Vermont Farm Purchasing Program is super unique in food banking. Most of the rest of the food that we're getting or purchasing is excess in the food system. That's what food banks were originally created to do, was to acquire and redistribute excess. We are now at a point where that is the excess food in the food system is not enough to redistribute to our neighbors. And so we have these other sources that need to fill those gaps.
Mike?
Just what percentage of the overall food that you're distributing is represented by Vermonters Food in Vermont?
That's a great question. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. It might be different depending on how it's measured by like weight or dollars. So I'll have to figure that one out for you. That's a good question.
Can you just back up a slide here? I want to make sure that I understand what Representative Wright's question was. Vermont Feeding Vermonters is which?
So it's purchased food, and that's what we buy from Vermont farms.
Okay.
That's what Representative Wright is asking about. What percentage of the overall packaged food? I will say the largest percentage of food that we're distributing comes generally from TFAP. But smaller.
Representative Pearl.
That excess food, is that, and you're saying it's no longer enough, is that because of the efficiencies of food production and they're not having as much excess, or because of need, or both?
I think from our perspective, it's primarily because of need. Before the pandemic, we were not purchasing the same quantity of food. We were able to utilize most of what was donated or federally available. There was some purchasing happening, but not at all the quantity that we have now. And I actually put this question to our operations colleagues a few weeks ago, and they're working on a comparison chart for me that sort of shows what that difference is now, because I had that question as well. And there could also be a whole host of reasons for that, but from what I understand, it's just that the need now, post-pandemic, with all of the pandemic support programs having ended, far outstrips the ability of those donated sources to meet the need.
Representative Wilson.
Did you say that the SNAP program has been restored?
I did not say that, but it was not gone.
Oh, because I get a lot of questions about that.
Oh.
And it's always said it's been a federal thing, right?
SNAP is complicated. It is a federal program that is administered at the state level. So there are state options, and each state gets their own set of choices around that program. What you might be getting questions about are the emergency allotments that were available to people. So people had a larger benefit amount regardless of their eligibility level during the pandemic. And that all ended last April. And I think some of the charts I'm going to show you will sort of show why you're getting those questions.
Okay.
People just don't have as much money available to them through that
Who
program.
would I refer them to if they have a question?
You're welcome to send them to me, and I'll connect them to our SNAP team.
Simple enough.
Yeah, feel free. Feel free.
Thank you.
Can I continue?
Yes.
Let's see. So if you can kind of follow these arrows, but there's no need to because I'm going to explain it to you. So CSFP is the Commodity Supplemental Food Program for older adults, and that goes out in monthly distributions. I think last I checked, it was over 160 distributions around the state where we're dropping those boxes either for people to come pick up or at senior housing sites or different locations that are convenient. Our network partners are the primary way that food gets out to communities. So there's over 225 of those organizations around the state. Some of them are open 2 hours a week. Some of them are open 6 days a week. Really varies by community, but they're doing a ton of work to make sure that all sorts of food gets in the hands of community members. We do our own direct distributions and partnerships with schools and hospitals. Those are those Veggie Van Go food distribution events, and those are primarily fresh produce. Sometimes some protein like eggs and yogurt sneaks in there, but mostly it is produce distribution. SASH produce drops are essentially boxes of produce dropped off at SASH housing sites. And SASH stands for Services and Something at Home. It's for older and disabled adults who receive their services in their own home. So they don't have to go, they're not leaving for appointments. And we recognized that that was a community that had trouble accessing food at available points and partnered with SASH coordinators for them to bring food to those sites. And I apologize for not being able to remember that.
Support and services at home.
Thank you. Support and services at home. And then we operate a backpack program at schools around the state where kids get a backpack full of food to bring home on the weekends. Usually it's food that they can prepare for themselves. It doesn't require, an oven and a lot of cooking skills. This is
Representative Rice.
How is the backpack program administered? Like how are the schools determined or?
You know more about this one than I
Sure,
do.
yeah. The backpack program, the food bank administers that. It's an independent program in partnership with schools around the state. Schools can apply to become a partner, and that happens once a year. That list is pretty long. It's on our website. You can see which schools are being served. I do know that we've had more and more requests to become part of the program. There are certain capacity limits, and that's just one of the kind of trends that we're seeing across all our programs is connecting kids with small amounts of food when school's not in session. It's to be supplemental, but it is statewide, and there are a number of schools that partner.
So would you say, sorry,
Yeah, no bad.
would you say that you're currently not able to, you don't have the capacity to meet the need of schools that are?
That would be, yeah, I think that there is more demand than there is capacity right now in that program.
Representative Templeman.
This program that you just mentioned, Backpack, I'm assuming that that's prepared food?
It is prepared and packaged food that's kid-friendly and ready to eat,
And,
that they can prepare themselves, pop a top and eat, or
okay,
yeah.
so pre-prepared, not by your services, but
Purchase
through
that, right.
manufacturing. And then are there any prepared food services that you participate in? Like, for example, I'm thinking, Meals on Wheels, for example, or.
We have some programs that we partner with, for instance, with the CAPS agencies where we're partnering with providing food and they're preparing meals, provide to the community, but we don't do a lot of prepared food at the food bank.
Yeah, we ourselves do not prepare any food. We do occasionally source prepared food. And a lot of the folks who have been asking for those prepared meals are either shelters or CAP agencies that serve the unhoused populations around the state. But traditionally, it has been challenging for us to acquire prepared food. It often comes frozen and frozen meals, and it's just not, packed, like shelf-stable prepared foods are not something we've regularly sourced or had access to. So that is an area that we're looking at, but is not necessarily somewhere that we've operated in a lot. And I do think there are opportunities in the prepared meal space, but that's not an opportunity the food bank is prepared to fill.
Representative Cole.
So in just trying to understand the funding mechanism a little bit better, because I know it's multi-layered and complex. So the backpack program seems to be a project within Feeding America, the national organ? No.
Not necessarily, no, it's a food bank program.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Maybe I am looking at a different thing.
I think they may partner with Feeding America to source some of the foods because they're specific, but it is a program that's funded through Vermont Food Bank.
Okay.
There may be grants. We may get some grants through Feeding America for like school-based programs.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so this one's just, when I looked up the website of the backpack program, the first thing that came up is Feeding America has over 10,000 backpack programs across the United States.
It sounds like you're on the Feeding America website.
Yeah.
Yes. But that's kind of.
We are a network. We are a network partner of Feeding America. We're a network food bank. So we are part of that collective programming that happens at food banks across the country.
But you're not one of the 10,000 that's like, that they're listing.
That's a good
Basically.
I genuinely have no idea. Yeah, I think what I suspect is that Feeding America is counting the programs that are operated by their network food banks in that 10,000.
Exactly.
So the 40 or so schools that we operate would be counted as part of that 10,000, but that's the national organization speaking for the whole 200 food bank network around the country.
Yeah.
Does that help?
It does, yeah. So basically their funding, even though it's kind of like framed as if their funding goes to one of these 10,000, like it's more the state-led funding for those 10,000.
Yeah. It may be a side conversation about our relationship with Feeding America.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a complexity to that relationship where certain programs that we operate do receive funding through Feeding America. Sometimes those are national grants that Feeding America implements. Sometimes it's direct food through them. There's a variety of ways that we relate to that organization. So it's, I don't know what it is for Backpack.
Yeah, whereas like the Veggie Bingo seems very Vermont, like very much Vermont, whereas the backpack, I'm like.
We invented that one.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
He's claiming credit for that.
Yeah.
John?
And to confuse things, wasn't there another backpack program during COVID?
Not Backpack specifically. So Backpack is a program that exists in the Vermont Food Bank. It also exists in communities. Here in Montpelier, the Rotary Club operates the Backpack program. So partially that capacity is very diversified. And some communities who maybe we were not able to serve or we didn't have enough capacity to serve just started their own program. Okay. These numbers won't be unfamiliar to you. I presented these to you last year and I don't have the updated ones in a cute graphic yet. But since 2020, we have now distributed more than 60 million pounds of food around the state, which we're averaging about 12.5 million pounds per year. Prior to the pandemic, that was between 6 and 8 million pounds. So it's been a significant amount of growth. We work with over 300 farms. I think it's exactly 311 who we purchase or receive gleaned produce through. And it is roughly $2 million that are kept in the Vermont economy through the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters purchasing program.
A large proportion of those 300 farms are farms we purchase from, both in large scale and through smaller grants at the local level. I think it's about 30 farms that donate gleaned vegetables to us, just to give you the scale.
Just something you might not have on hand, but would be helpful to see is where those farms are geographically.
Oh, that's a great question. Let me see if I can find that information for you. Some of that will be easy for us to provide because they're farms that we contract with. I don't know if we have a list of all of the the granted ones that our network partners work with, but I can at least tell you the communities that food went to. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and we're going to talk about hunger for a little while and what's going on with food security in Vermont. This is a graphic that essentially combines two different pieces of data. So the numbers beginning at 2006 through 2019 are USDA data. That was the only source of food security data that we had prior to the pandemic. During the pandemic, the USDA has quite a lag to their data. So UVM created a study group and did several studies on food security during the pandemic. So the numbers on the right side, and I have to apologize, these are like sort of lumped in together. My chart making skills are not so sophisticated as to show you how they compare, but you can see all this information in one place. So food security, the big takeaway here is that food security in 2006 was 9.6%. You'll see in 2008, it went up to 12.1, and then 2010, 13.9. And that was due to the Great Recession and the job losses around that economic disruption. It took us about 10 years after the Great Recession to come back down to pre-recession food security numbers. Then the pandemic happened about a year later. And so from what we understand about the way economic and social disruptions create challenges for people accessing food, we anticipate that it'll be at least another 10 years until we're back close to that number. The numbers during the pandemic were significantly higher than what we saw, but also some of the supports available were higher than what we saw. And so now, because those supports have ended, but people are still struggling, we're seeing really significant food insecurity, and we're really trying to understand how to help meet those needs or what things are gonna get closer for folks.
Your last point here, 1 in 10 is an unacceptable level of hunger to return to. So as status quo, but like you're saying, it'll take us 10 years to return back to an unacceptable level. Right? I mean,
Unless somebody was to make some significant changes
mhm.
that helped to turn that curve more quickly.
That's why you're here.
That is why I'm here. Right now, the number that we have access to is that 2 in 5 people in Vermont have experienced food insecurity in the past 2 years. This is from that 2022 study that looked back a year into 2021. We had anticipated UVM would do another study. I'm not sure if and when they will. And so as an organization that just explains this problem and doesn't actually own the research, we don't have a lot of answers about what exactly is happening statistically right now. But this is the closest I can give you to what we know.
Representative Pearl?
Yeah, just going back to the last one, I was just wondering, has there been any change, because it's something I've heard, I guess, about the metrics of determining food insecurity? Like, have those metrics changed since '08 to now?
Not to my knowledge, and you would probably get a different answer from a researcher, which I am not. I just want to be very clear. Absolutely not a researcher. But there is a standard set of questions that the USDA uses to determine food security, and those questions were adopted by UVM in the studies they used. So I believe, while it's not exactly apples to apples, it's asking the same types of questions of people about how they measure their own access to the food they need and want.
I think something we know about the data as well is it's always underrepresented the number of people experiencing food insecurity because it's a fluid situation. You may be secure 1 month and not the next. And so I think the food bank really sees that in the work we do, where people, the need for on the individual level can fluctuate. And so the data, the folks showing up for food help have always far exceeded those USDA numbers.
Yeah, so I'm going to show you a few more charts that are going to hopefully help fill out that picture a little bit more, because I think that's one of the hardest things to grasp is that fluidity and the way it changes. This is a chart from State of Vermont data about 3 Squares Vermont individual caseloads. So you'll see that caseloads went down during the pandemic when supports were available. And this data ends when the last fiscal year ended at the end of June, and caseloads are significantly higher than they were in 2019. I don't necessarily know where that's headed, but you can see from this trend that things headed back up, and that is not the direction that we want to see things going. Although it is good that more people were able to access that federal benefit through 3 Squares.
I guess just to follow, I just wanted to clarify what was going on in my head. I was just wondering if there was any, if maybe this problem had been or has been as significant for a long time, but are we just doing a better job reaching those people and figuring out that there is a problem, or if there is I'm trying to determine between that and if there's a real increase in the problem per se, and obviously we need to get to the root of what's causing that. And so that's where I was going with that. So I was just wondering if there was been any changes between, maybe we just looking in the right places before, or maybe that's not the case. I just trying to.
I don't think that's true. And I say that because I know that our network partner organizations who track who's coming through their doors are telling us, we've seen 50% more new households this month. We've seen, our numbers are up 100% since 2019. I think that that is not something that I have a chart for. Unfortunately, that's a little bit harder for me to track because we're just really hearing anecdotally from them. And I think some of what Sarah can tell you from those anecdotes and examples really demonstrates that there are new people coming and that there are people coming more regularly and using food shelves and food pantries as a source of groceries. You maybe go to the grocery store once a week. They're going to a food shelf or food pantry once a week now to supplement whatever they're able to access at a grocery store. And I think for some people, that was how they were living prior to the pandemic. And I think for some people, they became familiar with this system and it was made a little more comfortable or destigmatized a bit over the past few years. And I think for other people, they just don't have the resources that they need to meet their needs. And food is one of those areas where there is a reliable resource available to them that they can use, so then they can use their actual dollars to pay for other things.
Yeah.
So I think it's complicated.
Right.
And I think that's the hard part about it. And that's what makes a single source of data challenging, which is why I brought a few with me to hopefully help you understand that there are a few different ways to look at this and that it's not just one, like, oh, this is what it looks like and this is the reality of it.
Yeah, I just trying to understand if it's partially a metric of how good of a job that maybe you guys are like doing with outreach, like maybe people weren't aware of programs and now they are, or they're more comfortable, like, and I don't know, and I'm not saying that there's a, you know, that some of those things are good or bad, I'm just trying to understand. Yeah.
There, you know, we have colleagues that are out in the field. Carrie is often out in the field talking to folks. And recently they did over 150 interviews. And I'm just this morning was looking through themes and over again. This is the first time I've had to visit a food shelf. I really didn't want to go. I'm a business owner. I don't qualify for food stamps. I've never had to visit, but I've had to choose between feeding my kids and paying my bills. Yeah. Like that is just coming up over and over in these comments. And I think it's a reflection of kind of your question.
Yep.
And that feels more intense.
Representative Lovett, and then Representative Cole, and then Representative O'Brien.
I just want to talk to your point or your question. I'm really active in my food shelf in Grand Isle, and we have seen a massive uptick of working families coming and contracting, like independent, the guy who does drywall.
Yeah.
He came once, he says, I come once a year now. I've seen him every single week because he's realizing either people aren't paying him, and there's this ripple effect of especially independent contractors or people who work for themselves who aren't getting paid. And families are realizing we do need to come here. And if you do qualify for food stamps or SNAP, it often doesn't, diapers aren't included, baby wipes, paper products, menstrual products. So we provide those. So we're filling a lot of gaps. And I think partly in terms of uptick, I think once COVID started, I think every food shelf that I knew of did a really good job of saying, look, we're here for you. And then people started, as Carrie said, the stigma of going to a food shelf that first time is really hard. And people come in, you're like, oh, you're the woman who checks me out of the library. Oh, you make my sandwich at the deli. And you see them around town and their heads are down because it's like, no, I don't want to know you from that other place. So you have to be really respectful, but also people need to eat. And all of these, I keep getting into fights with people say no one's working. At our food shelf, 95% of our people have jobs, whether full-time or part-time, and sometimes there's part-time because of health, or they're retired. And they just can't quite make ends meet. And food, inflation is, food's expensive. But I think it's hard to count how many people are actually struggling with hunger because people don't actually like to admit that they're struggling with it. So I think these numbers are probably on the low end, to be perfectly honest, based on what I see.
So we've got a couple more questions, and then maybe we should let you try and finish up.
We'll get there.
Okay. Lost track of how many slides you've shown us.
Me too.
Representative Cole.
No question here, but I just wanted to share too, one of my really good friends was a part of this study, part of the research team that did the 2022 UVM study, and I'm sure he'd be really happy to explain metrics and the history of because he's been doing this for years, what metrics went behind coming up with those numbers, what makes a person food insecure, and
Maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm wrong, but I'm looking at this data, I'm noticing that one place where there's probably not a lot of fluidity is once you are in the food insecurity situation, you don't leave it. So new families are coming into it, they're increasing those numbers, but on the other side, you don't have 10, 20% people year after year sort of leaving it, like, oh, I've got a better job now, or I don't have to go to the food shelf. It seems like there's sort of a...
I think it really depends. I think sometimes like other things that shift seasonally, this is something that does that, right? Like you have a kid who goes off to college and they're not in your house anymore and you don't have to worry about groceries for them. So that lightens the load and then maybe you makes it, I think, or there's, there are households that do change jobs, or there are resources that people are able to access after waiting for disability for a long time. It really is so unique and so individual to people that's actually what makes it so hard to talk about as the status of food insecure or not food insecure, right? We don't actually even think of it that way. We think of how many people are using this system at any given time that we're counting it, but not necessarily who is or is not food insecure, as a personal status. So I think that shift can kind of help understand, it's a system to be used, right? And some people are using it at certain times and not others. And we're actually in the time of year when people tend to use it more. And that's because we live in Vermont, and Vermont costs more in the winter because you have to heat your house. So I think there's sort of all sorts of pieces that affect this sort of organic system that grew up to solve a challenge that people were having, and that as life gets more complicated, it is also a little more complicated to try and figure out all those factors.
That actually bears out here. You can see winter shoots up, summer drops down.
Yeah.
Partly because folks can grow their own food.
Charles?
It probably won't be too popular saying this, but I think the number one problem is Vermont's the highest tax state in the nation. This isn't going to get better.
I can't say taxes haven't been mentioned as a reason that people have talked about using food shelf and food pantry services, but economic challenges are, so I'm not sure.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious, and I'm from Caledonia 3, from Lindenville. Everybody I talk to has no idea how they're going to pay their bills unless they have really good jobs. I mean, there's no way around this.
I think one thing that is true is that food is one of the only flexible costs on a day-to-day basis. Your tax bill is your tax bill, your heating bill is your heating bill, your rent is your rent. And then I think that's where there's just a lot of pressure, and that's where we hear that constant impossible choice that people are having to face.
So just a couple more slides that'll help fill out that big perspective.
Okay, this is showing over the last, since the pandemic, really.
This is showing since the pandemic started. This is our Veggie Van Go program, and this is actually one of the easiest pieces of data for me to access because we count every household that comes through. And at Veggie Van Go, people are able to pick up for more than their own household. They can pick up for up to 5 households and bring that food back to their friends and their neighbors, or other people that live on the way back to where they live. And in October, we saw the highest attendance we've ever seen at 8,930 households that month. But you can see this kind of ebbs and flows, but it is essentially creeping up. That trend line is moving in that sort of northward direction that we would rather not see it go in. And Veggie Van Go is actually one of the programs that is most accessible to people. It's a drive-up program. You don't have to tell anyone your name. You don't have to give anybody your income data. You can just say, hi, I'm here for 3 households. And they'll say, okay, do you want it in your trunk or your back seat? And that's it. And so it really destigmatizes food access. It happens at schools and hospitals, which is places that people are comfortable going. They don't have to worry about finding a new place down a dark alley in the back of a church. And it means that people use this system to access food a lot. And we hear from a lot of people like, oh, I've never been here before. Is it okay if I take a box for my neighbor? Yes, please. Thank you. You're helping us get food to people who need it. So these numbers, I think, are actually very telling compared to some of those other ones about what is happening on that month-to-month basis. This is very global information about the pounds we distribute. And so this is pre-flood and then post-flood. And I included this here because I know there's going to be a lot of conversation this session about flood impacts. And I can tell you that we at the Vermont Food Bank have seen the impacts of those, especially immediately when they happen, but those impacts have continued. And they're statewide. even communities that were not directly impacted, not London, not outside of Londonderry and Ludlow and Barry and Montpelier and some of those really challenged communities, we're seeing organizations distributing more food and saying, oh, there are households who had damage or financial issues because of things that were flooded. Or I ran into somebody in Newport who said, oh, the power outage from the flood fried my freezer and I had just bought my year's worth of beef and it all melted. And so now I don't have any meat for the year and I don't know what I'm going to do. That wasn't necessarily, they could maybe get their freezer replaced, but they could not get the money back from the food that they lost. So are now using a system like ours to help backfill some of that. And prior to flooding, we had sort of settled into this like million pounds of food a month. Now we're up closer to 1.2 or 1.3 million pounds of food per month. So this is sort of a little brief overview on the flood impacts. Essentially, we're seeing between a 20 and 40% increase over pre-flood times in food distribution amounts. Some communities where stores closed, like Johnson, where they no longer have a grocery store, were really impacted, and our Lamoille Community Food Share partners in that area are just seeing a ton of impact. Did you bring any quotes from Lamoille County?
I don't think so.
There was just an article in the newspaper about how much more need they've been seeing, and it's primarily because that access to that grocery store, they're more still the closest town over. They just don't have that same access, right? So there are these residual impacts of the flood that are part of the whole food system that are really challenging folks. And we see that as adding to this long tail. We were talking about a 10-year recovery period to get back down to 9.6% food security rate. We've now added floods into that. So I don't know if that makes that longer. I don't know if that makes that steeper, but it does impact people's ability to afford and access food. This is just a brief map that I think is really helpful because while there were communities that were really dramatically impacted by floods, there were tons and tons of communities that were impacted less dramatically. And this is actually from before the floods in August in Addison County. So I don't have that data on here. To sort of wrap it up, I maybe have a couple minutes. There are some long-lasting effects of food security from disasters. There are also long-lasting effects from the ends of those federal programs. And so combined together, we're really seeing the pinch on households. Our network partners are seeing the pinch, and more people are using charitable food access. And what we're asking for you to do to help us solve this is we need your help to help us get $2 million in the budget adjustment to address the food that's already been distributed through like our flood response through the past year, and then an additional $3 million in base budget in the FY25 budget. And I know that the budget adjustment is the big time sensitive one right now. And our hope is that your committee will be able to create a memo of support for that amount to send to the Appropriations Committee as they hustle through that budget adjustment process, because knowing that your support is there will allow them to have a little bit more flexibility and hopefully support that funding. But really what we can do right now is ensure that people have access to the food that they need. This is not a long-term solution. There are lots of systematic solutions that also need to happen on top of that. And I want to be clear that we are also going to be here advocating for those changes too. But we need the charitable food system to be strong and to be ready to serve people's needs while you, as a legislature, work on all of those other bigger, more global solutions, like last year with universal school meals, looking at some adjustments we can make to SNAP, thinking about funding Meals on Wheels more adequately so that those meals are more available to people who need prepared meals. There are lots of little pieces, and at the same time, we need to be ready to serve people's needs.
Quick question, Representative Levin.
Oh, just curious, and maybe this isn't the right time. I'd love to hear more on your thoughts on what we can do to change SNAP.
That is another question for another time. And actually,
okay.
Hunger Free is the best organization to have a conversation with that, but I'm happy to help connect you. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
How were pounds of food distributed? How is that started as a metric, just because you think like bread, a pallet of bread weighs a lot less than a pallet of potatoes, say.
That is a metric that food banks have used since the beginning of food banking. And it was to try and average out essentially, you know, those disparate food weights for different kinds of food. Yeah.
And nutritional value.
Right, exactly.
John,
Exactly.
I can talk to you more about it.
So you may have just said this, but we haven't, normally we would, everyone would know what was in the budget adjustment proposal. And we haven't seen that yet. Do you have any sense of whether there's funding for the food bank?
I don't have a sense. We did meet with the administration and ask them to put money in the budget adjustment and the FY25 budget. And we don't yet know if they have done that.
Okay. Okay, so that will be, we'll all know soon.
Yes, very soon.
And then I would just ask that if you haven't, and maybe you have, submitted a request in writing in the form of a letter.
I have submitted a request and I have some paper copies I can leave with you and then follow up with a
Okay,
digital.
electronically is fine. That's,
Yeah.
yeah, good. Any other last minute thoughts or questions? And I appreciate your sharing all this with us and
Great. And
questions.
you'll all have copies of these as a PDF. I sent them to Sidonia, so she has all of these slides. If you have additional questions about them, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to help answer.
Great.
Or find answers. I may need you to remind me of that question about fermenters feeding fermenters.
Where are the farms?
Say it again.
The question was, where are the farms?
Oh, where are the farms and the percentage one is the one I'm gonna have to work hard on. Like, I can do that though.
Good. Thank you both for coming.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much.
Before we break committee, just as far as the rest of the day goes, we don't have anything else on the calendar, anticipating that once we won't probably